and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I just want to take one moment before we get into the workshop that we're going to have first to express thanks to Mike Rigney, who's running a little bit late, for his service as chair of this committee for the last several years. It's a challenging position, as I'm quickly finding out, and I think that he really deserves our thanks for the huge amount of time and the hard work that he put into the position. I'd also like to welcome Sal Lapoli to the committee. And Sal's gone right to work to learn as much as he can about being on this committee and what we can do and what we can't do and so forth. I'd like to thank Evelyn Thorin for stepping up the other day and graciously accepting the position of secretary. She's one of the most valuable members and has been one of the most valuable members of this committee, and one of the things that makes her valuable is that she knows what has to get done and how it has to get done, so I want to thank her for that. I want to explain that Chelmsford Telemedia is recording this session tonight, and it will start being broadcast on Thursday morning and then routinely after that. The reason that this is not being telecast is that the production truck is broken down. At least that's my understanding. However, there will be a video record of this event. Seems there was something. Are there any other people? Yes, present. Yes, okay. Thank you, Alana. All right, our first order of business, I'm going to shuffle my papers. I brought everything I own so that I would have access to everything. And now I've lost. What to do with the card? Right. Excuse me. This won't be the last time this happens, so. What's Mike's last name? Okay. I wanted to comment also on the time. The reason we went with a 6:30 start is that we wanted to allow for ample time to discuss the status of the present budget and to get public input on the 16 budget. And so if someone got fouled up on the time, it shouldn't be a problem if they come in, because they'll still be here for the finance discussions later on. So it's my pleasure now to invite Mike Gilbert, who is going to provide us with information about superintendent search services, both in terms of possible interim as well as long-term solutions. So, Mr. Gilbert.
Good evening. Just so everybody knows who I am, my name is Mike Gilbert. I am a field director for the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. I've worked for the association for almost 20 years. I also have served as a school committee member on 2 different school committees for almost the same period of time. So I have provided you tonight with a brochure that contains information about the search services that we provide, and contains a proposal for a full search, which is our sort of standard proposal. My understanding is that you are currently looking for an interim superintendent, given the time of year and the time frames that you're going to have to deal with. I have provided, during the transition between Mike Rigney and Al as chair, I've provided them with some names of some folks who we know may be available. We have additional names if that becomes an issue. Generally, the way interim search is done is they're a little bit less formal than a full permanent superintendent search. I provide you with some names of retired and other superintendent candidates who either are or have been superintendents who may be interested in continuing to work. You would contact those folks. I would say 3 or 4 of them who may be available and willing to come and talk to you. And then you would interview those 3 or 4 people in public about what the things are that you need that person to do, and try to find a fit for the short term to get you into and through the search for a permanent superintendent. On the note of a search for a permanent superintendent, given the timing, what you might consider doing, depending upon the timing, is beginning the process of a search for a permanent superintendent within the next 6 to 8 weeks before school lets out, when parents are still paying attention. You would do focus groups and gather information in that time frame. Then we would sort of go dormant for the summer. And then you would advertise in late August, early September, when educators are starting to pay attention again. Education Week, which is the premier publication that does a lot of national advertising that educators read, doesn't publish in August. Their first publication comes out usually around the 28th of August for the next school year. That's what I would advertise, and then you would go through a process with usually a search committee. We would help screen applicants. The search committee would interview probably 8 to 10 candidates based on criteria that we have gathered from focus groups and surveys. And they would whittle that down to 3 to 5 finalists that then the school committee would go do site visits where those candidates are working. The candidates would come here and visit Chelmsford, and then you would interview them and make a decision. Generally, that's about a 4-month process. You just got the really short version. The budget costs for doing that full search would be roughly about $20,000. That would include our fee and expenses, advertising costs, and any travel expenses that the committee and/or finalists might have, depending upon where those finalists end up coming from. People ask oftentimes about a local search versus a national search. If you're advertising at all, your search is a national search. Because if you're advertising Education Week, it's a national publication. If you put something on our website, it has national reach. A local search today tends to be an internal search inside the district. If there are strong internal candidates that the committee has a mind to bring forward and talk to, I would advise you to deal with that first. Simply because if there are strong internal candidates, external candidates tend to stay away. There's a strong network of assistant superintendents and superintendents who are looking for jobs, and they talk to each other and say, oh, is there an internal candidate over there? Yes, well, then I'm not going to apply because we'll let the internal have the job. So oftentimes it makes my job easier if you deal with the internal candidates first, because then when I go out and do recruiting, I can say to people there aren't any, they've dealt with it, or there isn't anybody that has strong support. So that's sort of the process in a nutshell, and I know you have questions, so I will let you ask your questions, and I'll try to answer them the best I can.
If we have, if any of the candidates, this is the interim superintendent search.
Sure.
Okay, so you're recommending that we choose 3 or 4 names. However, is there any specific process when dealing with the retirement board? So if you have a superintendent that has retired, I saw a list, Glenn Kuchar sent me a list.
Yep.
I saw a list of people, and I recognize a lot of names have been around long enough, and they've retired. So if we chose to want to bring them in for an interview, is there some process? Should we advertise?
Each individual is going to have to deal with their retirement situation themselves. The way the pension system in Massachusetts works is it's on a calendar year system as opposed to a fiscal year system. So if you're hiring somebody now, who's worked for 6 months, depending upon what they have been earning, they may or may not be able to work for the next 6 months. Generally, if the way their pension system works, the longer they've been retired, the more flexibility they have. Because it is, what they can make is the difference between their pension and the salary of the position they left today. So if somebody who retired last year, the next superintendent coming in is probably getting anywhere from 3 to 7% more than they're making. That's a small amount of money, so they won't be able to work for long. But somebody who retired 5 years ago, the salaries have escalated for superintendents because of the dearth of candidates to a point where there's a pretty good amount of money that those people could earn and still not need a waiver. The issue of a waiver for a retired person requires a failed search. So you would have to go through a search process, not find a candidate, and then go back to the state and say, we want a waiver for an interim. There are, on the list that I gave to Al and to Mike, there are a couple of people who are not retired, who are currently still employed, but their contract is up and they don't want to stay where they are. Those situations occur. They don't believe they're a fit where they are now, so they're going to move on. We wouldn't give you those names if we didn't feel that those people could be solid candidates for you. So I think what you do is you bring 3 or 4 people to the board, you interview them, you make a decision, and you deal with the financial issues afterwards.
I guess I'm not clear yet. Do we have to post when we're going for the interim?
You don't have to
post the position.
You don't have to post it.
Okay.
You don't have to advertise it if you don't want to. Advertising is expensive.
So the comments about you have to post and find that there's no need, that pertains to long-term?
No. For the superintendent's position, there is no legal requirement for you to post. There's no legal requirement for you to do anything. You can sit here and as long as the person meets the qualifications and is licensed, school committee can take a vote and say, that's the person we want to be our superintendent. You don't have to go through a process if you don't want to. It's not something I would recommend, but, but legally, you could put your hands up today and say, I want the high school principal to be the superintendent for a period of time.
But that's still looking at an internal candidate. That's a potential. You could, as a
Right, I mean, that's
transition.
even an outside person. If you had somebody in mind who was available and was able to work and had a license, you could appoint them.
Mike, could
Yes.
you just educate me, the board, one more time about when the 20,000 or that budget amount, which is the 12 plus the 8 that we were talking about, can you just educate us on when that obligation starts? If you refer someone and that interim becomes permanent, when does all that money get transacted? And what is our responsibility?
Let me talk a little bit about that. We'll help you with the interim process, with the interim search, and that's part of what we do. So you pay dues to the association to be members of the association, and we provide that service. If the interim were to become the permanent superintendent and you were to make that decision without going through a full-blown search, we wouldn't charge you. We haven't done anything. We helped you get the interim, and you did the work to decide that that person was the right person for the permanent job. God bless you. There'd be no charge. If we have to go through the process of doing focus groups, recruiting candidates, doing all that work, then we would talk about a contract to do that, and we would go through a regular search process. Given the timing, that would be in fiscal 16, and any fees would be from fiscal 16.
And if the search, could you tell everybody, explain a little bit more, if that superintendent, for whatever reason, wasn't to work out in the first couple of years, do we have to pay another fee, or?
No, if you hire a superintendent through a search process with us, we have a 2-year guarantee. If that person leaves within the first 2 years of their contract, we come back and do the search for free. You would pay for advertising and expenses, but you wouldn't pay us a fee.
Do you have a range of salaries, the monies that an interim superintendent would require?
Generally, what you do with an interim is you look at what your current superintendent is making, and you'll work out a per diem or a per month rate, generally based around that. It depends also on what you can work on as a contract with that individual. Some of these folks are retired and will say, look, you've got a staff, I only need to be here 3 days a week, so here's what it's going to cost you. That's the point. You have to have a superintendent, but an interim might not necessarily need to be five days a week, at least for a short period of time, especially as you're going through the summer. So you could work that so that it works out in terms, especially with somebody who's retired, they can stretch that availability for you, still make some money, and keep the cost down for you. So we can certainly talk about what that might look like, but it would depend on who the interim is. For the permanent superintendency, if we were doing this, I would bring you a series of comparable and competitor communities, and we look at what superintendent salaries are there, and we'd set a salary range before we even advertised. One of the things we've found is that it is better for you to, since this is a public process, to advertise the salary range so that people who are looking for the position understand what the salary range is and are not going to hold you up at the end because you advertised comparable salary and they think that should be $250,000 instead of $185,000. So if you advertise the salary range, they know what it is, and you'll get candidates that will work for that salary range.
Do you know what the current salary range is? I know what Lowell's willing to pay on their upper level, which is a high number for us, but do you know what that range is of what is currently out there?
Don't hold me to this, but I believe the last time I looked, the statewide average was about $170,000 for superintendent. It does not really vary by size. It really is, because this is a market-driven position, it's really about what the market will bear. I would look at what comparable communities are in terms of ability to pay, and I would look at competitor communities, your neighboring communities, to sort of look at how the salary range would work. And we would certainly provide you with that data whether we do the search or not.
I want to thank you very much for coming all the way out here to the hinterland.
It's on my way home.
Oh, okay, good. And I'll be in touch with you very soon.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
All right, great.
Thank you very much, Mike.
All right, enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Okay, the next thing on our agenda is the monthly financial report, and I'll turn things over to Superintendent Tiano and our consultant, Mr. Antonelli.
Okay, folks, the handout that you're receiving, here you go, Alan.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about our year-to-date expenditures through February 27th, and we're going to turn it right over to Mr. Antonelli.
The first report that you have is for the student activity accounts. There are 3 of them, one at the high school and one at each of your middle schools. In each student activity account, there are 2 accounts. One is the savings account where all of the deposits go, and the second is your checking account where the expenses are paid from. So what happens is that when as disbursements are made through the checking account, those expenses are reimbursed from the savings account. In the case of the high school's student activity account, the amount that has been authorized by a previous school committee, which is in your school committee policy, for the maximum amount of money in your checking account is $60,000. You'll note that on the upper third section of the summary that you have before you. So you have all of these accounts and their balances. There is one account here that you'll notice has a negative balance, and that is the girls' basketball account. However, there is an asterisk there, which says that the girls' basketball made a deposit in March to bring that balance to a positive dollar amount. Remember that this report is as of February 27th. These reports that I'm giving to you will be reviewed every month, first by the principal. You'll see the principal's signature on each one of these reports. The business manager will also review it, and that is signed, and then it goes to the superintendent for his review. So you have 3 sets of eyes looking at the reports, reviewing them before they come to the school committee. When we met as a subcommittee this morning, there was a question about the amount of money in the Theater Guild account. And someone asked whether or not the musical was included in that account, and the answer to that is yes, it is. So that's why that balance is pretty large. But they expect to spend practically all of that by the end of the year. So on the second page, there is the McCarthy Middle School account. And you will notice for both middle schools that the amount of money that is authorized in the checking account is a figure of $12,000, where the high school account was $60,000, and there's much more activity, much more money in the high school account. The middle school accounts are considerably lower, so the amount authorized in the checking account is $12,000. Since these are the first this is the first month, really, that we're giving you the report for all 3 of these accounts. You will notice that the balance on line 11 at the McCarthy School is higher than the amount authorized by the school committee. What we will do to correct that is, instead of asking for all of the reimbursements of expenses next month, we will deduct that amount until we get below the $12,000 figure. It shouldn't take long at all, and we'll be monitoring it on a monthly basis and giving it to you, so you'll be able to review it as well. So you have the summary there of all of the accounts for the McCarthy School, and on the 3rd page, you have a summary of the Parker Middle School. Again, you'll see the amount authorized is $12,000. The balance of the checking account right now is a little bit higher than it should be, and we will follow the same procedure that I just described so that by the end of next month it will be below the $12,000 figure. There is a small negative amount in one of the accounts. You see that on line 16. That's nothing to be concerned about. It's probably just a field trip, and we'll make sure that that money goes into that particular account. At the Finance Subcommittee, someone asked about the Student Council account, and we're concerned why there is so much money in there. That money has been there over the years, has been accumulating. The principal is aware of it, and he's looking for an expense that will benefit the whole educational community at the Parker School. So there you have the report for the student activity accounts, and as I said, we'll be reviewing that every month, signing it and getting it to you on time so that you can review it as well. The next report is a summary.
Frank,
Yes,
before you go on.
question? I'm
Yes,
sorry.
just a question. Is that all of the documents that you're presenting tonight will go up online?
Yes,
Right, because we don't
absolutely.
have them on the screen for the people that are here to be able to see them. And so I just want to make sure that they know that they would be online at some point, and that we are doing the monthly review of the student activities accounts, because we haven't done them before. We want to just make sure that we're following all of that, and there's a whole list here of what is deposited within the account, and then all the things that match it with the activities either at the high school or the two middle schools, just so that people in the audience know.
Excellent point, and we'll have those online tomorrow, so that everyone in the community can take a look at them. Sometimes by the time I say something, Anne Marie puts them online, and I just saw her leave, so she may be talking to someone about putting them online right now, but we'll get them online by tomorrow, no problem. So that is your student activity account, and then we have our general fund account, as well as a special ed account. In this district, the special education expenditures have their own fund number, but really they're general fund expenses. And as I mentioned at our finance subcommittee, we're working with the town accountant. We've already discussed merging the special education fund with the general fund, so all of those expenses will be under the general fund. Basically, if you go to the second page, I'd just like to review this information with you. You'll see the original appropriation was $50 million. The amount that was transferred was $978,624, which included $108,000 in prior year encumbrances that were carried over. So the revised budget that we have for reporting purposes here is $50,978,624. The next account is your year-to-date expended, which is $28.5 million. Your encumbrances of $19.5 million. Those are subtracted from your revised budget to give you a balance of $2.4 million, which is approximately 95% of the entire school budget, which has either been expended or encumbered at this point for the whole year. There are some salaries that are not encumbered, and that's why that number isn't a little bit higher. Another version of this report is called a year-to-date budget report by locations. It has the same numbers, it's just broken out in a different way. If you wanted to take a look at the report to see how much was budgeted, for example, at the high school, you could go directly to the high school accounts and look at these budgeted amounts as well as expenses. And the same for all of your sites. That's why we have a site-based management budget for FY16, and we know that the principals are responsible for monitoring those expenses at each site. In addition to those two reports, to complement those two reports, we have a report that is very big. You've seen it before. I passed it out at the meeting this morning, and this report is based on the auditor's field work, Powers and Sullivan, when they came out here in the fall and said, you really ought to be doing this type of report on a monthly basis to make sure that you're keeping close track of all of your expenses, which is what we want to do. In this report, I would like to draw your attention to page 14 to explain something to you. If you look at line 813 in this report, you will see from columns AP all the way over to column AU that this is updated information as of February 28th. and the columns are the same that you just saw on those other reports. These numbers agree with the reports that were generated directly from Munis. These numbers are downloaded into an Excel spreadsheet, so I wanted to make sure that everyone understands that the numbers that you see here on the bottom line are exactly the same as the reports that came directly from Munis. When we were reviewing these reports, as we are doing every month now in a detailed fashion, something caught our eye when it came to encumbrances in the transportation area. So I'd like to draw your attention to a line in this report which is identified on line 682. 682 is on page 12 of the report. Just goes to show you how detailed this report is. I just said 682. There are a total of 819 lines on this particular report. So on line 682, you'll see under column AR, the encumbrance column, that I have highlighted a number of $382,280. And if you go over to the report on the same line, under column AX, for the previous month, because this report is comparing the ending balances as of January 31 to the ending balances as of February 28th, you'll notice that the encumbrances were only $18,680. That's a very big difference, and that jumped off the report to us as we were reviewing it. And so we drilled down into Munis to find out what that was all about. Come to find out there was an error when someone went in to adjust a purchase order. The purchase order was originally for $300,000, and they wanted to make it $39,000. So instead of going up just by $10,000, it was multiplied. The 30 was multiplied by 10, which gave us the $300,000 encumbrance there. So it's really overinflated the amount of money that we have for encumbrances. Going back to line 815, I've made an adjustment so that you can understand that we have reduced that amount on our Excel spreadsheet. We also reduced it in Munis, but when you reduce it in Munis, it was reduced in March, not in February. So you will see that in your report when you look at your March numbers. Here, I wanted to make sure that we reduced it so that we could pay particular attention to how much we felt is required. That's the amount of money that we feel we need. That's the amount of money that we are estimating we need from now until the end of the year, which is beyond how much we've already spent, the year-to-date of how much we've already spent, as well as the encumbrances. So in this particular case, as of February 28th, we have estimated a required amount of $3.3 million. Yet, we see in column AS that there is only a balance of $2.7 million, which means that we are estimating that there will be a shortfall of $559,000. That's as of this date. As of January 31, we had estimated that there would be a negative balance of $660,000. So we've gone from a negative balance of $660,000 down to a negative balance of $559,000, which we are happy to report to you. The reason why we see some of these reductions, one, we have reduced the amount of supplies that we anticipated purchasing from now till the end of this school year. And the second thing is that since we're going over these reports, not only the general fund and the revolving fund and the grant fund, we've noticed that in the grant funds, there was some money available that had not yet been encumbered for salaries. That money was encumbered in the general fund. So we have reversed out expenses in the general fund that could have been charged to the grant funds. We have done that, and we have also reduced the supply account. So we're looking at a projected negative balance of $559,000. We have included some additional money in our required amount under special ed costs, and we've included some money for our utilities. Those are both wild cards, I'll say, because you could have unexpected expenses in both of those areas, and that is not an unusual event for school budgets. So we have included some additional money there, and we're keeping track of this on a monthly basis. This report is coming to you a little bit later than normal, as I mentioned at the Finance Committee report, because I was not at your meeting on March 24th. We are meeting this Friday as an administrative team, and we'll be going over the March numbers, and we'll be sending those to you as soon as possible for your next meeting. Any questions there on this general fund? No? Okay. The next report is for the grant funds. We printed out a separate report for grants. It's double-sided. It lists all of the expenses, all of our projected revenues. We're in good shape with our grants. We're on target with those that don't have an encumbrance. We have made that adjustment so that will show up in your March numbers. You'll notice on page 2 that we have E-rate funds that we've collected, which are $62,000. We have plans to spend those funds, as we do every year, to help offset the cost of technology in the school district. We also have the ELL grant and various other grants which we have reviewed closely and we feel are on target for spending all of that money at the end of the year. Included in this report is your circuit breaker fund, which is on page 9 of this particular report. It shows that we have carried forward $87,000, and I wanted to explain that in addition to that $87,000, there was approximately $560,000 that was collected at the end of last year, which was reported here in this report. So when we were talking with the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee and the School Committee, we were saying that we had $660,000 as a beginning balance in the circuit breaker account, and everyone agreed that we would spend $160,000 of that money in order to bring the balance down for our circuit breaker as a contingency, if you will, of $500,000. We still have that $500,000. In fact, that $500,000, as well as the money in the school choice account, is what we are planning to use to offset the deficit that I just reviewed with you in the general fund. So we have the $500,000 for the circuit breaker. We have collected $200,000 so far in school choice, and we're expected to collect another approximately $140,000. So we do have money in both of those accounts to offset what we have projected so far as the deficit in the general fund. So there's a review right there of your circuit breaker account, and then 2 other small accounts in for the grants, the robotics grant, etc. Our next report and final report is the revolving account. We have several revolving accounts that I'd like to review with you. On page 1, you'll see the cafeteria revolving account. We have budgeted $907,000 in revenues for the cafeteria revolving account. So far, we've collected $551,000 in revenue for the cafeteria revolving account. We believe we're on target to collect the additional $355,000 for that particular account. So far in expenses, we've spent $521,000 of the $907,000 that was budgeted for expenses. About a month ago, the cafeteria supervisor, director, April Lasky, reviewed these numbers with me, and she was thinking that perhaps we would have a balance in this account, maybe of $25,000 approximately. This account is very tight, and we may not end up with a $25,000 balance. I think it's going to be really close to break even in this account. If we don't break even in the account, then we would need to offset that with some money in your general fund account. It's too early to predict this, but as I said, we're reviewing these numbers every single month, so I'll give you an update as soon as we go over March's number, but I wanted to bring that to your attention, that it is real close. And similarly, with the athletic revolving account, which is on the next page, you'll see here that we projected to spend $334,000. And this particular account, I want to point out to you, has not an error, but what happened, to give you the history about this, is that this account was commingled with a transportation account. So we've separated those accounts out. We've separated the transportation from the athletic revolving account so that we can just look at athletic revolving and say, that's what we've collected, that's what we've expended. What happened here is that you'll see on line 732, it's described as supplies transportation. An expense was made for $49,566. That has been taken out, but in March. So you'll see that adjustment in March. The same with that encumbrance. There's an encumbrance still out there. You'll see that encumbrance taken out in March. This particular fund is on target to spend all of the money that's in there. I think that this fund was under budgeted in terms of the expense. I think it's going to be more like $400,000. But I think that the revenue from the user fees as well as gate receipts and any other funds that they've collected will pay for all of the expenses in the athletic revolving account. In addition to those two revolving accounts, we have other accounts. One, the gift and donations account. We receive a lot of money from different people, companies, etc. They will give us money for the Parker School, for example, and they'll say, please apply that towards your playground equipment, not playground equipment, but they'll think of something, computers, not at the Parker School, but at the Byam School, they may say, okay, apply that to your playground equipment. So we have a whole bunch of donations, and we've expended that, and you can see when you look at the bottom line here, we have collected $86,000 in revenue, and we've spent $83,000 to date. Lost and damaged textbooks is not a very big account, but according to state law, you keep track of those expenses and those revenues by setting up a separate revolving account, which we've done here. We also have an adult education account on page 6, which shows that we have collected $181,000, and we've expended $173,000 to date. And we have a child care account on page 7, which shows to date that we've collected, which means that we've collected revenue as well as had a carryover of approximately $1 million. So the total collected, including the carryover, is $2.3 million, and the total expended so far is $1.5 million. The next account deals with out-of-town student tuitions. We have a couple of students from out of town. We're taking that money. You'll notice on line 250 that there is an encumbrance there. We're using some of that money to pay for the instructional salary of the person who was teaching that particular individual. We have summer school expenses. We have the school choice account, which I mentioned to you before, but I will go over that again. It's on page 10. It shows that we have collected so far, as I said before, almost $200,000. It's $197,000. So our total revenues, $770,000. Again, we made an agreement with all the townspeople, all the boards, that we would use $573,000 from school choice to offset those unpaid bills that we had this previous year. And that's exactly what we did, so you'll see total expenses there of $573,000. Our civic activities revolving account deals with fees. When groups come in and use the schools, they pay a fee. To use the schools, they may also pay a custodial fee in addition to a rental fee, and that will offset the expenses for having the custodian in the building. And lastly, we have the transportation fund, which is now all by itself, and that is for the user fees that we have for transportation, regular school buses. I shouldn't have said lastly, because there is another report right there on page 13. I thought I would review them all, but there are actually two more reports, one on page 13, which is the student activity account. That fund is different than the student activity accounts that I just referred to when we first started our discussion. Those student activity accounts were for fundraisers for individual accounts. This fund is for the purpose of collecting fees so that students can help offset the cost of providing special clubs and activities for those clubs. So the fees that are collected will be paid by way of paying the advisors their stipends. So that's the story on page 13. And on page 14, we have the turf field account, and you will see that so far we've collected $87,000, and we have expended $17,000. Finally, there is no snow on the field, so we'll be renting the fields out, and we'll be collecting some more money, which will go into this account to help offset the borrowing expenses that we have for the account. So that, in a nutshell, is a summary of our financial reports as of February 28th, 2015.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'd like to repeat an announcement that was made at the beginning of this presentation, and that is that all of these statistics and forms will be available online very shortly. I'll now turn the meeting over to Dr. Tiano. We have a need for an update in terms of food service.
We do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going forward and built into our budget, we had working with Bill Ricker Public Schools to extend our 3-year contract by 1 year in terms of working with our food service manager. As you know, April Lasky has been with us for 3 years, and our goal this year was to extend that contract 1 year in terms of having her groom her replacement so that Chelmsford Public Schools could have their own full-time food service director. In working with the superintendent in Bill Ricca, it's come to my attention officially today via letter that they wish to discontinue this program in sharing the food service manager. Therefore, as of June 30th, 2015, April Lasky will not be working with us, and she will be remaining in Bill Ricca full-time as her full-time job. That has an impact on our particular budget in terms of what we have budgeted for our food service director. We have budgeted $50,000. In talking with Frank and talking with April, that will need to be raised most likely by $25,000 as we look at the salaries for food service directors so that we could have our own full-time full service director starting July 1. So we will be working together in terms of accounts where we could move that, and we will provide that for the committee.
All right. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is the primary purpose of tonight's meeting, and that is to present, once again, the budget for 2016, and after the presentation, to hear from the public in terms of concerns and questions.
Okay. Frank and I have put together a PowerPoint that you will see. It's similar to one that we had shared with the Finance Committee on March 26th. As you folks know, you had approved for us back in December an aggressive timeline for putting together our FY16 budget. As you're well aware, we have completely revamped the manner in which we have developed this budget, and this committee has had the opportunity, as well as the Finance Committee, to work with our department coordinators and our principals in terms of answering questions regarding the makeup of the cost centers that are that this budget is divided into. We had provided you folks with a preliminary budget on January 27th, and as you're aware, that number was $53,118,938. As we worked with the committee and with the town, we realized that that number was high in terms of our overall town budget. The school committee has adopted the bottom line of $52 million, or $52.4 million. The committee has asked the administration to develop cuts to our preliminary budget to the tune of $618,938. Our administration had worked several weeks on these preliminary cuts and shared them with the committee on March 24th. As we currently stand right now, those reductions are on the table, and Frank's going to walk us through the overview of our school budget presentation, including those reductions to get to the $52.4 million. I'll turn it right over to Frank.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So what's different in this school year budget? Superintendent just mentioned, we have done this budget based on zero-based budgeting. So we started from the ground floor and built the budget up, and that is unlike any year in the past. In the past, you've done kind of incremental budgeting, which would mean that you would take $100,000 and you would say, whoop, I'm going to increase that maybe by 2%, and you would throw that 2% into the budget. This is a budget that was based on the ground floor, so we went and met with all of our site directors, which is our next point. It is a site management budget, and we met with them and we said, okay, you're responsible for building this budget, and they did. They met with their staff, they met with all the people in their building, they talked to some parents, and then they built their budget, and they came up with a very solid budget, I think. It's loaded with detail. We've renamed lots of accounts in this budget, hundreds of accounts. I stopped counting at about 300. We've described the accounts differently so that people who are looking at the budget can easily tell if there are textbooks being spent, or if the money is being spent on supplies or in the maintenance area. We have also created numerous accounts in this budget. There are some accounts that were not included. The Department of Education recommended that these accounts be included in the budget, so we have included accounts such as in the technology field, we have included an account which would account for internet expenses. We've itemized all the salaries. If you've seen the budget, you have seen a complete list of the salaries, the present salary as well as next year's salary. We've used the salary schedules that were agreed upon in contract negotiations. We feel we have firm numbers for our salaries, and we have the backup for that. Likewise, we've done the same thing in special education. We've listed all of our special ed tuition accounts, and we have been very detailed with that information. If you've seen that budget, you know that there is a lot of information in there concerning special ed expenses. On our next chart, it shows a summary of the entire budget process. First, we had an FY15 original budget of $50 million. And then the townspeople at the town meeting increased the FY15 budget by $870,000, which brought the adjusted budget to $50.8 million. Our preliminary budget was increased by $2.1 million beyond that $50.8 million, so we had a $53 million budget originally. Town manager got a look at the budget, and he also saw the numbers that he got from the state on the cherry sheet, and he said, I'm sorry, we can't fund that type of budget. This is what we can fund, and it's a $52.4 million budget. So we have gone back with the school committee. We've provided a list of cuts that approximate $618,000, and which you'll see pretty soon. On the next slide, however, you will see just an overview of the entire budget, which shows that a $52.4 million budget, 75% of the budget is in salaries, which is very typical of a school department's budget. 22% would be your contracted services, which would include such items as transportation, special education tuitions, etc. We have utilities at 2% and supplies at 2%, rounding off to $52.4 million. And our next slide shows a complete list of all of the cuts that we recommended to the school committee, and that totals $618,000. You can see those cuts there. They were discussed in length by the administrative team on many occasions and brought to the school committee and discussed there at a couple of their meetings as well. Our next slide shows the projected enrollments for next year. You may not be able to see that, but in the bottom right-hand corner, it says that the district's enrollment for next year is projected to be 5,018. That's a little bit lower than what we have right now. We have 5,056, or we did as of October 1 and December 1. So it has gone down some. And on our next slide, we have other significant points that we wanted to share with you. The student activity fees have not been increased. The lunch prices have not been increased. The athletic fees have not increased, and the transportation fees have not increased. Our next slide, which is our final slide, shows a comparison of various towns that we feel are comparable to Chelmsford, and so does the Department of Education. Those with the asterisks are really towns that the Department of Education feels are comparable to Chelmsford. So you go through here and you see that Chelmsford's per pupil cost for this past year, that's the past year that we were just in, 2014, is $12,437, and the state average is $14,547. These numbers just came right off the Department of Education's website. So that basically is our summary. We've worked hard on the budget, and we're proud that it has included so much detail for you to review. And we hope that you have reviewed the budget, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have on the budget. And if we don't have the answer for you, we'll get it to you by tomorrow.
In going back to the list of cuts, I believe there's an adjustment on the CHIPS item that you wanted to maybe address.
Yes, we can talk about that. With the CHIPS, which is the third line down there, it says CHIPS Music, .4, $20,059. We've included that as a cut because it was budgeted in the general fund. So we're still going to reduce it from the general fund expense, but we are not going to cut that position. We are going to fund that position with the community ed revolving account that we have. But it will be cut from the general fund budget.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Before we open things up for question, I'd like to give the committee members an opportunity to take any action they'd like to with regard to the proposed cuts.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we reinstate the 2 fifth grade teachers over at McCarthy and find the money somewhere else.
Second.
Okay, the motion's been made and seconded to reinstate the positions for the 2 fifth grade teachers, and was seconded. Any discussion? It was also part of the motion in order, for that to take place, for the administrative team to find the most appropriate place. And not in those words, but that was the intent. Anything else?
Yeah.
Mr. Rigney?
I will start this discussion by asking a question. The projected enrollments for FY16, the updated ones, show a total of 380 kids in the 5th grade between Parker and McCarthy combined.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about how you got to that number?
Sorry, Mike, I'm just pulling up my enrollment sheets. In terms of working with projected enrollments, we work directly with our student database manager. As you know, you have students from 2 neighborhoods that do not attend the same school that their counterparts do. For example, you have a neighborhood in Byham. Byham typically attends the Parker Middle School. However, you have a neighborhood that attends the McCarthy School. Same thing in the Harrington neighborhoods. You have Harrington typically attends the Parker Middle School, but you do have a neighborhood that attends the McCarthy Middle School. So what we do is you look at the numbers, obviously, of the 4th grade students, and then you look at where those students are located from those 4th grades in terms of how they were split. And so we worked with our student database manager in terms of being able to identify those students, and we came up with the numbers that you see before you.
Because there are 384 kids in the 4th grade overall this year, I believe, unless those numbers have changed as well. And that would suggest that virtually every kid in 4th grade is going to be in our 5th grade classes, which has not been the case historically.
Right.
Do you want to follow that up?
I think he's looking to see if there's been a change in the 4th grade class.
Okay.
Right.
like they've already, he's been graduated.
Right.
But
Okay.
no, it looks like it's the same. So I guess my question is about why are you projecting that we'll have essentially a 100% cohort survival?
Those are the numbers looking back, and that's a good point, Mike, as well. As you noticed, in first grade, we denoted, for example, when we move our kindergarten students up, we average about 8 students per first grade. When we look at our 8th graders going into 9th grade, essentially, we minus roughly about 40 for students who go off to the charter school, Bishop Girton, Nashua Catholic, and so forth. For our 4th graders going into 5th grade, we try to keep that relatively stable in terms of the amount of students that we lose, for example, to the charter school and so forth. Over the last few years, those numbers have still remained relatively stable as opposed to numbers that we've seen in the past.
I see about a 5% decline on average. How many teams would be at the, are you using to calculate this class size average at McCarthy?
Currently, what you see there for the projected is you see 4 teams of 2, so that's 8 teachers. And so you see the 200 divided by 8, and you have that class size there.
So if we had 5 teams, you'd have 20 kids in a class based on a 100%
Right.
cohort survival.
Right, 2021. And what we've done also too, Mike, and we've shared this at the middle school level for the last several years, we have kept our class sizes low intentionally due to what you'd see across the Commonwealth in terms of a dip in our MCAS scores. You would see a spike in our elementary, you'd see a dip in our middle school, and then a spike in our high school folks, where we've put support in coaching and, for example, in science, for example. So we have kept those class sizes moderate for the past few years.
Everybody sees a middle school dip.
Absolutely.
That's not unique to us.
No, it's not, as I just said, but that's in terms of where in terms of meeting AYP, that we've put our focus in terms of the instructional piece. So we've worked to keep those class sizes lower.
So if you put the team back at the 5th grade of McCarthy, you'd have 20 kids per class there.
Yes.
If you had a 95% cohort survival instead of 100%, you'd be down to about 18 kids a class.
That's possible.
Wouldn't it be easier to add a team in September rather than try to take one out in September?
Not budgetarily, in terms of planning for, you would have to plan for the addition of 2 staff members come September. I'm not sure where we would get the funding.
All right, I guess the only other question then is if you have the 4 teams and you have a class size above 25, district policy says that 25 is an upper limit for class sizes.
It's not a policy, it's a recommendation.
It is a policy that recommends no greater than 25
Right.
kids per class.
But it's not been a solid in tough, difficult times. We've had 4th grades, elementary school, high school classes with 25, 26, 27.
So what are you recommending? Are you recommending a class size above 25?
I'm recommending exactly what we presented. So roughly 25 in a class at grade 5. Similarly, you'd look at Center School, grade 4. They're scheduled to have 25 in a class as well. If you look at Harrington, grade 4 currently, you look at 26, 27 kids. That's not ideal.
Wait a minute.
Harrington, grade 4.
If we reduce it?
No, I think he's pointing out that right now you have 26 there. Yeah, are you going to try to reduce that as well?
Well, we can take a look at South Row. Or we can add school choice.
Any further discussion?
Well, I guess the other question would be where is the money going to come from?
I I think we've asked the superintendent to go back and to revisit. I don't know if now is the time to start looking at the entire budget to see what we could cut. My thought is the superintendent, along with Frank and Mr. Antonelli, would go back and make recommendations.
But they've already brought recommendations. So essentially, we're asking for their second best plan.
Yes.
We also had a discussion, we had a budget subcommittee meeting this morning, just for anybody to know, and we went through all these documents, and we had an extended discussion, and there were some suggestions at the subcommittee in which there might be some sources of funding, one of which was that we do have money in school choice which we could borrow, and then as we rearrange things within the budget, we could definitely replace that money. I did ask Frank Antonelli if that's a possibility, and he said that we could do something along those lines. So if we're looking at a specific place, we could look there. The other thing is that the amount of money, if you are reducing the amount of cuts that we have proposed, the reductions. Right now, we have $20,000 approximately that we didn't have before in CHIPS. So we're not looking at $100,000. If you want to look at it this way, we're looking at 80.
No, Evelyn, sorry to interrupt you. That is still a reduction to our operating budget. It's just that the position is not being reduced in the money, the position is being funded from community education.
Okay.
So it's a reduction to our operating budget still.
Okay.
Just a couple of questions, Mr. Chairman. Do we know the exact amount of students that might be in private schools that would transfer into the 5th grade? Can we actually quantify them to the exact number that might be going into the 5th grade? The answer's probably no, right?
There are,
It's hard to predict.
No, it's, as Mr. Rigney had mentioned, it's not typical for students to be in private school and elementary school and then join us in middle school. One likely it would be the other direction in terms of a reduction.
there are a handful of kids who go to elementary school with Lowell charters, but it really is like 4 or 5, and then you get the Innovation Academy, and I think they're projecting 17 or 18 kids as their early enrollment for next year.
But this has been the policy that we've tried to keep
Class sizes.
the class size exactly what we're trying to do right now, correct?
Below
In the past?
25.
Below 25?
Right, and the grade 5 is another transition. We tried to keep the kindergarten enrollment low. We try to keep the 5th grade low because, again, that's a transition.
It's an important year, right?
Yeah, well, it is a transition into the middle school. It is a change in where they're going. You know, there may be some other struggles that some students have. So, and again, if you said that you were looking at smaller class sizes in order for them to adjust for the MCAST and a change in building and location and busing times in the morning, so there's less time that they're going to be sleeping in the morning because they start early. There's a variety of things that may be impacted with regard to the 5th grade.
But the policy doesn't say that. The policy says we urge that we keep class sizes at 25 or less
Right.
for 5th through 8th. We don't distinguish.
No, we
5th
had the ones
graders.
lower, we didn't distinguish from 5 through 8, but we did at one point distinguish what we would have in elementary schools and make
Yes,
recommendations on
there
the
is
kindergarten.
in fact, it's lower in the elementary schools.
Is there any committee member who is concerned to the point of perhaps making a proposal on any of these other items, because we might want to have that discussion before committing the money or not committing the money in this area?
I just stand by my original motion to ask superintendent to go back, as he's been working really hard, along with Mr. Antonelli, to go back and reallocate or look through other cuts in order to keep the 2 5th grade teachers. And I don't think tonight is appropriate to look at the entire budget and start trying to create that idea.
Mr. Rigney, earlier, this morning, you indicated they might have different priorities. Is this time?
Well, yeah, if we want to talk about priorities, when I look at this list of cuts, I worry more about the coordinators than I worry about the 5th grade teachers. I'm very happy to see the music teacher being put back. More globally, we're living in a world with limited resources, and we have to make choices about how we're going to spend those resources. Are there other places that we can take money out of the budget? Undoubtedly there are. But we'd asked the superintendent and his team to come up with over $600,000 in cuts. They did that. Now we're asking them to go back and find a different subset of it. We're taking the difference. We're essentially, the motion proposes that the fifth grade class size is of such importance that it should be the first thing that's addressed if there are alternative funds available, and that it's worth making cuts in other areas. We have, it looks to me like we're going to have a smaller fifth grade class next year than we did this year. The sixth grade class had 411 kids in it. I'm projecting with a 95% cohort survival rate, we'd have 367 2 years later. That's a drop of what, 50 kids, almost 50, 45. At some point, we should see a reduction in the number of classrooms. We've been asked for several years now by the Finance Committee and by the Board of Selectmen and by the Town Manager, how is it that we are in a situation where we have declining enrollment and yet our staffing headcount has not decreased? And our answers are always, well, you have to get enough kids taken out of a single classroom to be able to get rid of the classroom. It doesn't help if you lose 5 kids across the fifth grade at McCarthy from one year to the next. That's not a classroom reduction. But when you lose over 40 kids in the space of 2 years, that is a classroom. And I think we do have to have some thought, some discussion about what, not only what an acceptable upper size is for classrooms, but what an acceptable lower size is as well. If we had unlimited funds, if we had all the revenue and all the resources that we needed, I agree. I'd prefer to see smaller classes. But we don't. We're over $600,000 short of a level service budget this year. We are $800,000 to $900,000 annually away from having full-day kindergarten. We've come to a point where we have to make some choices. And the difference between having 20 and 25 kids in a fifth grade class is a choice that's a choice I can live with.
Well, the assumption is it is 25. Can you guarantee it's 25?
No, and that's a fair point. That I'm making this argument based on my projections of what the population will be next year, and it's true. If you have 100% survival rate, or if you have kids move in unexpectedly over the summer, you could in fact wind up with more than 25 kids in a class. And there was some thought put into the policy. There's a reason that we have 25 as an upper limit, and that needs to be respected as well. But my counter argument there would be that it would be easier to add a classroom in September than to remove one if suddenly we have a lot of kids go to innovation, although the projections don't look like that this year, or if we don't have a bunch of kids move in over the summer and we wind up with 17 or 18 kids in a classroom at McCarthy. We know we're not gonna make a cut then. We do have a little bit of room with this budget. And that's by design.
I guess the only thing I feel like is, or Mr. Rigney, is cutting the human capital, cutting those teachers those are the last people that are talking to our kids, that are educating our kids. I think we can find something else before you go to a teacher. So that's what I'd like. That's what I'd like Superintendent Tiana to find.
And the other piece is that if you reduce them now, you're still going to have to make up the difference in the budget later. So if we just go into the budget the way it is currently, rather than waiting to see whether or not we have to do it later. I understand what your argument is, but I can't wrap my head around how you would do the numbers with regard to the cost. I know that you had also mentioned, about the coordinators. Those aren't, right now, those aren't real people, so we're just not replacing them. I have personal affinity towards the science, but currently, with regard to the teachers, again, we have tried to make it, it's an unwritten policy, that the last thing that we do is to reduce the teachers. We try to get everything else in there, including administrators, before we get into that. And just so people understand that we have had to reduce our budget so much that we're getting so close to where we're going to have to, in future budgets, reduce teachers, because we're just not going to have the funds in which to have them, and then that way, that's the way the class sizes are going to increase. But currently, if we may have the funds, we maintain the class sizes or the lower class sizes as long as we can have them.
Any further discussion? I'd like to make a suggestion, get your feedback on it. We've heard arguments both ways on this, and we haven't heard from the people at all. What I would suggest is that we open for input from the audience, because we've asked them to come here and give us their ideas, and that we hold the vote until after we've heard the, is that okay? Okay. All right. At this time, then, the Chelmsford School Committee would like to hear public input. We welcome comments from the people. I'd just like to remind you, the script changes a little bit here, that we would hope that there wouldn't be any personal attacks as part of any of the discussion that takes place. If there's anyone that would like to speak at this time, please come forward, and when you come up, if you just state your name and address for the record, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Beth Logan, Lovett Lane, Precinct 3 rep. So I kind of want to go to this discussion about the lowering of the enrollment. And every year at town meeting, the VOTEC school comes in and talks about how more and more Chelmsford students are going there, which implies, with our lowering enrollment in the younger years and more students going to VOTEC, that our high school enrollment is actually shrinking. And I'm curious how much we expect the high school enrollment in shrinking, and to the point you've been making, what kind of cuts have been happening there to balance out the fewer students. And I'm hoping that by cuts, we're not actually talking about getting rid of teachers that are working, but we do have teachers who retire, and we don't necessarily have to replace them. So I think that that's hopefully the approach that we can take. Of course, if you lose all your science teachers, you can't necessarily put a history teacher in there, and I understand that. So those are my two questions. How much is it lowering, and what are we doing about that?
What we do every year, and if you go back through our budgets this time of year, more frequently at the elementary level, you would see us reduce a first grade and add a second grade as you watch a bubble go through a particular school, for example. So over the last few years, we have reduced teachers where we can. I think, as Mr. Rigney was saying, we've lost students over the years, and when we can, we would reduce a teacher. At the high school level, you would see the reduction of sections or offerings if the enrollment declined. What we're looking at right now in terms of the high school is we have currently that bubble will start to leave our high school. For example, right now we have 416 seniors. Next year, or currently our juniors, we have 422 juniors. Last year we had over 400 seniors. Coming in right now as our freshmen, we have 390 students, and our sophomore class is a smaller bubble of 364. So right now we're still large in terms of those classes of 400, but coming behind them, you see another little spike just leaving the middle schools in terms of 410, 406. So I guess my point is, you see dips and you see valleys. What we've done is we've reduced our budget. For example, we may reduce an FTE at the high school, which would be gone through attrition. Somebody retires, but we needed another teacher at an elementary school. So our overall FTEs may not change. It's just the wave of the enrollment as it goes through. Currently what we're doing, and we look at what we provide for students, in particular at the high school, for example. We've put in 4 partial FTEs as our middle school engineering program has taken shape over the past few years. We have more requirements for students as they enter their freshman year, science and technology, in terms of being able to provide them with what they need. I guess my point is it's flexible. We look at it every year. Where we can reduce, we do.
So what is the high school drop expected this year, and what was it last year?
The high school drop in enrollment?
Yes. Because I guess, I mean, it sounds like you're not changing the number of teachers at the high school, but all these other kids are going to VOTEC. So it seems a little contradictory here.
Well, you can have more kids go to the VOC and still not see a drop in the high school. It depends on how many school-age kids you have.
Well,
right?
that's
And
why I'm
those
asking.
numbers are
What I
gonna go up and
specifically
down.
asked is what drop we're seeing, and I haven't heard that answer. And what drop did we see last year?
We're looking at, currently we have 1,579 kids at the high school. And next year, we are projecting to have 1,520,
So that's 70 kids there.
roughly.
And that's with your estimate of how many are going to go to VOTEC.
Right.
So are we losing teachers at the high school, or are we taking them from 5th grade even though we're losing 70 students from the high school?
No, what we're doing is we are adding some school choice students at the high school as well. The school committee had voted that at a previous meeting in terms of school choice folks. To avoid, we look at the revenue piece as well as the reduction piece. As you lose enrollment, you could reduce teachers. Oftentimes, it's not enough to reduce an entire teacher or an entire FTE, but as we have school choice, we're able to maintain that teacher at full time as well as bring in revenue as well.
Okay, so the high school went down 70, and you're keeping the high school head count the same. So you're turning around and taking it from the 5th grade, who's reducing by maybe 40.
We're reducing at the 5th grade is our proposal.
Okay,
in
just seems a little backwards to me. If you're losing 70 at one school and 40 at another, seems like the school losing 70 is the one that's better in a position to have fewer teachers.
Well, it depends on how you categorize that. If you look at the 5th grade as a total, those students at the McCarthy Middle School are not impacting teachers' grades 5 through 8. However, at the high school, you would have teachers who teach freshmen, also teach juniors, also teach seniors, and so forth. So it's really not the same comparison in terms of an overall school, in terms of how you look at that.
At the high school, you're teaching subject matter, so you, as you
I
know, 'cause we all
understand,
went
I
there.
actually went to
Yeah.
high school,
Yeah.
yes, but there's still 70 and 40, and the 5th grade teachers can teach some 6th and 4th, that happens. So I still don't.
It's not the way we're configured, and that's the piece where I think you're, 70 versus 40, as Mike was saying.
Is there ever a time that you will reduce the high school?
Yes, so we have.
Okay.
Yes, so we have, of course.
So I'm just pointing out that you have, maybe we should look at more flexibility so that where we're losing more students, you lose the teachers instead of where we're losing fewer students.
Again, it comes to the point, you could lose 20 third graders across the town, but that's not going to impact third grade necessarily at South Row or Byam. If you lost 20 third graders at one particular school, at Harrington School, then your impact would be conceivably one teacher. That's a classroom. But
High school's all the same.
it is, but it's much larger in terms of losing 20 students across 400 students versus 75 is different.
It's still 2 teachers.
Not necessarily. Does that make sense?
Next, please.
Sections. Got it.
Hi, Regina Jackson, Essex Place, and I'll try to be as quick as possible. The numbers, I'm just going through the budget that was online at 5 o'clock, so this may not be all the updated one, but I just have specific questions on each line. Okay, so on page 1, under line 22, it says legal settlement of $14,667 for fiscal year 16 proposed. And I remember at one point somebody said something about that may be a sped legal cost. Is that correct?
The Director of Student Services is right behind you. I'm going to defer to Mr. Brooks, if I may.
Absolutely.
Because he is the one responsible for that particular account.
Okay, I'm just curious what it was.
Sure.
That's all.
Yeah,
I mean,
excuse me.
Regina,
Excuse
where are
me.
you, so we can access? We just want to know what line she's on, where she's at.
Which
Where in the-
document?
Which document?
On the first page of the budget, that was online.
Which tab?
I'm just
That's
on
the thing,
page,
yeah.
number 22. Number 22. I just want to know what
But sure, there's a special education legal settlement for 14667.
Okay.
It was for this fiscal year, for FY16 and for FY17. There was a legal settlement reached with a family for a child who was owed a tremendous amount of compensatory services. And so that was a legal agreement that was reached with the family's attorney and the district's attorney.
Okay.
Could everyone hear that? Could you speak into the microphone, because when you're speaking to her, they could.
Yes. No, you
Just into the mic, it works.
Yeah.
can face us.
There was a legal settlement, a special education legal settlement that was come to agreement last summer with a child who was owed a tremendous amount of compensatory services because of the district's wasn't able to provide services for that child for a period of 2 years. So we came to that agreement with that child's family. And it was for this fiscal year. We spread it out amongst 3 fiscal years for the benefit of the child and also to not take such a hit fiscally for each fiscal year. So it's 14,667 spread over a period of 3 fiscal years.
Thank you. Yep, that was it. Okay, on page 2, line 68, athletic services, it increased 11.6%. And I wanted to know what was that for? $54,000. It's just kind of,
I'm not exactly sure which tab you're referring to, and that makes a big difference for the school committee members to look at that particular account. I know that the athletic budget is up, and like you said, I believe it's 11%. However, included in the cuts that have been proposed is a $10,000 reduction.
okay, out of the 54,000.
Out of the athletic budget. There's a $10,000 reduction in supplies.
Okay, on page 2, line 60, the salaries business manager, okay, so if we go over to fiscal year 16, I understand it's broken out, but my question is, on the fiscal year 15, if you go over the actuals in the budgeted, which, because this run on this was January, is the overage for fiscal year 15 reflected in fiscal year 16 at all?
No, it would not be, and the reason why you would have an overage in that account is because you were paying for the services of the previous business manager as well as paying for my services at the same time. So it would mean that you would have an overage in that account. For next year, it's budgeted so that you have a single business manager for the entire year.
Okay, so the expenses for fiscal year 15 now are not going to be reflected next year? Okay.
That's
Okay,
correct.
got that. Okay, and then on the central office line, on line 67, there's an increase of 10%, 32,000. Is that, can you tell me what that is?
So you're looking at the tab 4 in the budget?
I just have it as page 2, I'm sorry. Tab 4.
Yeah, tab 4. Thank you, Brad. Yep. So this is line 67.
67, correct.
It has a total there of $32,000. That's the increase. That's the difference. Okay.
What is that for?
So what you're seeing in that particular account is you're seeing a difference in the business office salaries. We redesigned those accounts so that we have the business manager's salary under column H and just an individual salary of $127,553. You see that?
Yep.
And then we also have the the clerical salaries. We've included an increase in their salaries. We've also included in these lines, and if you compare column G with column H, you'll see that there are several lines, for example, 63, 64, and 65. You see how there are numbers under column H?
Yep,
And there aren't in column G?
yep.
That's because what has happened in the past is that expenses for the business office were charged to various accounts within the budget, but they should really be charged to the business office.
Okay.
We've done the same thing, and you may have noticed this in the superintendent's line items, as well as in the human resource line items. Those expenses were charged, for example, I'll just use an example, into teacher supply accounts or some other account of that nature. But when you go to report at the end of the year, the Department of Education is asking that you report under certain function codes. And so expenses for the business office should be reported under expenses right there in those accounts. And that's what accounts for a lot of that difference right there.
Okay. Okay, on page 3, the next page, legal services, the 70,000, what is that?
Can you tell me what line that is?
Oh, I'm
That's
sorry,
79?
it's line 81.
81, okay, that's the total, yes. And every year, if you look at that budget from column D over to column H, you'll see the actual expenses. For example, in fiscal year 13, we spent $39,000 in that account. In fiscal year 14, we spent almost $58,000, and the year-to-date for this year is $39,000. Those dollars are spent for legal expenses that are unrelated to special education, because there are separate legal expenses for special education. But these are legal expenses incurred through personnel matters in the school district, as well as for negotiations in the school district. Often you'll have legal counsel for negotiations, and that's where those services will be paid from.
Okay, the actual for, this was a January report. The actual was 39. Is, if the actual for fiscal year 2015 goes over the budgeted, is that going to be reflected in 16?
No, no, it won't. If it goes over, then what's going to happen is that that money will need to be drawn from the other accounts in the budget. I'm looking here at the actual for the period ending February 28th, and those two are pretty much the same as what we're seeing right there for an actual, which includes the encumbrance.
Okay. Okay, how about page 5? The line 145, 146, total 148. Now, the Kelly contractual services, which went up 56%, 654,000 you project for fiscal year 16, 770,000 on the substitutes. I believe I heard there was talk about bringing this back in-house, et cetera, et cetera. When is that going to be reflected?
That would be reflected once the school committee votes that final budget, and then we will revise those line items. So, for example, when you look under column H, under line 148, you see that figure of $770,000.
Yep.
Previously, we showed on the screen up here that we were planning on going in-house, and going in-house would result in a savings of $125,000.
That $125,000?
Yes.
Is that a savings that could be reflected for the $100,000 teachers' positions?
No, I'm sorry, that's a savings that we had to come up with as part of the $618,000 that we had to cut.
So that's already factored in?
That's already factored in. So what you will see here, instead of $770,000, is $125,000 subtracted from that amount.
Okay, how about, could you go to page 7, line 233, the instructional software, and I understand that you have redone the line items, $247,000. Where did that come from?
I'm going to defer to the technology director, if I may, and I would just like to say that there were many accounts in here, again, that were not correct. We were not using the correct state function code required by the Department of Education. So we took money out of those accounts and we put them in the correct account. So this is the correct account for that $247,000.
It's essentially what makes up all of the software that the children and the teachers use. So before, it was in, I think, technology equipment or some crazy line that it shouldn't have been in. What we did was just add up all the things together, and 247,003 is what we have for instructional software.
So how much was it the previous year? If
was
it had been coded
essentially-
correctly?
Well, it was, you know, in the ballpark. I mean, I renegotiate the contracts every year, so I always try to get it down a little bit. I think it was like 252.
Okay. All right. I'll try to be quicker, I'm sorry. Okay, could you go to, on page 9, line 309, legal fees litigation. So there's another line for legal fees. I'm just trying to get an idea of, it's kind of spread out all over.
Well,
What is that?
that's line 309, right?
Yep.
And when you look at that line, you look at the account right next to it, you'll notice that it starts with a 7. And that signifies to us that that account is a special ed account. All the accounts in the budget that start with a 7 are special education accounts. So that amount there is for legal fees for special education.
Okay, line 473, Chelmsford High School graduation. I know you talked about this before, but for fiscal year 16, you have about $19,550 compared to the budget of $8,645.
Yes.
And I know you talked about this, but could you please tell us what's the deal? If you're going fiscal year 16 with about $20,000, is that what we're doing in the future? That's line item 473. What was the
Yes.
answer? It was just out there.
The answer to that is that is what you will do in the future, and it really is what you have been doing in the past, except all of the expenses for the high school graduation have not been charged to this particular account. When you look at the actuals, you see that they're less than half of what the actual amount is that was spent. And those expenses were charged to various accounts, unfortunately, but now that you have this budget, you have a line specifically for high school graduation. That's the total amount of money that is budgeted for that. That's where all the money will come from, and it will not be charged to any other account.
Okay. Page 17, line 576, teacher conferences. It went from 5,300 to 21,175. And is that just the correction of everything that's been done wrong in the past, or?
Yeah, that's for the high school. So what was happening is the high school had a combined line item with myself up at the district level, and we found that most of that money was going to the high school teachers for, recertification for AP. So in speaking with the high school principal, I made reductions in mine, and he took them and assumed them into his budget for the high school.
Okay. Page 19, line 642, the copy at the high school. Has this already been addressed, or is this a different one? The
Copier
budget.
at the high school has been addressed in the list of projected cuts. They're part of the $618,000. We're
Okay.
reducing the costs at the high school.
Okay, because on this.
Mrs. Jackson, could I just inquire how many of the
Oh,
ones
I'm
you
sorry.
have?
Just a couple more. Okay, on page 20, just a couple things just stuck out at me. Page 20, line 675, 676, you have Chelmsford High School supplies general. It's just like they're out there for $16,500, just listed under supplies. To me, that's a very open-ended thing. That's something that should be looked at and very itemized, and you could probably cut that, okay? And there's another one that was a big one there. On page 23, line 782, a $9,000 increase. And I know it's probably because you said you put the things in the correct order, and that's wonderful, but, okay, page 24, and then I'll leave. Under athletics, okay, I know you said you cut the 10 with the 60, but if you look under line 830, other expenses, like what? Other expenses. And it's listed at 29,600, increased of 105%. And then the whole athletic budget increased by 54,000. If you're looking for money, you might want to look there. And then, honestly, my last one. On page 26, on line 904, 905, when you go in for the maintenance equipment, high school maintenance equipment, it's just listed 10,000, 12,000. It was obviously moved from another line item, but it's like, it's so general, like supplies. Okay, that's it. I'm sorry, I took my time. But in my opinion, in my opinion, 52,400,000 is plenty of money. I really do believe you have enough money. I just think you need to dig a little deeper and cut what needs to be cut, and I'm sure you can find it. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Your name and address, please.
My name is Amina Langford. My address is 7 Stedman Street. I'm here as a parent of a 4th grader, as well as a 1st grader at Center. I'm also a town meeting rep for Precinct 6. I have some questions, and the only part of the budget I'm going to look at is the technology section, if that's all right. You had said that if we came up with some ideas for other cuts, we might be able to keep the teachers in 5th grade. So I've come up with some questions. And I know I've asked some of these questions before, and I haven't gotten any answers, so I'm going to ask them again. The technology budget is about a little over $1.5 million. That includes salaries. It hasn't changed at all over the last few years, other than going up and down by about 100,000 or so. It doesn't look like any cuts have been made in that budget at all this year. And when I look at it, I see that there are areas that are questionable, to me anyway. For example, it looks to me like our salaries are totaling $500,000. If you look at comparable towns, on the DESE website, both Wilmington and North Reading are considered comparable towns. Their technology salaries are Wilmington's $365,000, North Reading is $251,000. Ours is $525 and change. In addition, we are budgeted next year to spend $67,000 at Chelmsford High School for equipment, $44,000 at each of the middle schools, and a total of $62,000 for all of the elementary schools for equipment. If you look at the other schools, Wilmington is spending at their high school, so we have $67,000 we're spending at our high school. They're spending $15,000. North Reading is spending $13,000. At our middle schools, now we have 2. Wilmington and North Reading both have 1. So we're spending a combined $88,000. Wilmington is spending $16,000. North Reading is spending $23,000. Then you look at the elementary schools. We have 4 elementary schools. We're spending $62,000 across those. Wilmington has 6. They're spending $12,000. North Reading has 4, like we do, and they're spending $17,000. Then you go into the sort of district-wide stuff. My concern on that is that there is a line item, actually, if you, on the technology section. It's line 182, and I did have a question about that. I understand that it was moved, that number used to originally be under service contracts, and service contracts are now $55,000, and that's now, the remainder of that was moved down to computer services. As the previous speaker had mentioned, some of the line items that we have are vague in their description, so I was wondering if Anne Marie wouldn't mind explaining to me exactly what that encompasses.
The network?
The computer services, line 182.
The network services in that line are comprised of basically 3 things. One is the maintenance agreements and the service contracts for all of our switches and other large devices, firewalls, and so forth. That's one section. The second section is we, for the first time now, have taken over the internet service provider. We never, it was always in utilities. Now I have it in my part of the budget, which is new. And the last part is integrated services, which is the renewals of our devices. So if we have if you have a firewall and it needs to have updates, you need to pay for them yearly.
Right.
None of these things are inexpensive, unfortunately. They're all expensive things, but if you don't pay the service support on them, then you get no updates, virus protection,
Right.
things like that.
Okay. So when you add all of that up, our budget comes to 1.5 million. It was like 1,535,828. When you look at the comparable towns, Wilmington spends $750,000 on their technology per year, and North Reading spends $475,000. That includes salaries. My concern is that, it's not that I think we're, I don't know how to put this. I think we're putting in technology into our schools and into the backbone, it seems, because this is where the large amount seems to cover the network, that doesn't necessarily have any place in a public school system. I've worked in high tech for a long time. I'm currently a tax accountant, but for a long time I worked in high tech, and I got to tell you, our budgets didn't look like this. I worked for electronic arts for a while, and our budget didn't look like this. When you look at the amount of the budget and the percentage that's being spent on network services. So I'm not saying we need to get rid of things right now. What I'm saying is, do we really need to spend $67,000 for equipment at the high school this year? Do we need to spend a combined $88,000 for equipment at the middle schools this year? And do we need to spend a combined $62,000 at the elementary schools this year? Because to me, the most important thing is teachers. Computers and technology don't teach our kids. The teachers teach our kids. And I, for one, and my husband works in technology, and he works in technology in a school system, and he said if he ever found out that teachers were being cut so that he could have more equipment, he'd turn down the equipment. In a heartbeat, he'd turn down the equipment. And so I think that we really need to take a hard look at this budget. The technology budget, it hasn't really been cut since, you look at fiscal year 13, we're spending the same amount of money. And you're going to talk about cutting teachers, but you're going to spend that same amount of money? I just have a really hard time swallowing that.
Yeah, if I can make a clarification. I guess just a quick clarification in terms of, the cutting of teachers. We are, through attrition, losing 2 positions, but no teachers are losing their jobs.
Right, but my child going into 5th grade is now going to be potentially in a classroom with 30-plus kids.
No, I don't see that happening.
Well, I don't know, because I got to be honest with you, a lot of us sitting over there, we know the numbers in our schools, and we're looking at our 3rd graders too. And I don't know where some of the numbers you're talking about, but those aren't the numbers we're looking at. And you're talking about a reduction of about 40 students, and that's not at McCarthy. I think that's overall between the 2 middle schools. Because, we're looking at the numbers at Center and the numbers at South Row, and I'm sorry, but I don't want my kid in a classroom where it's 25-plus or 30-plus. And I don't think a lot of other parents do. And I have to tell you, just in speaking with other town meeting reps, at this point, unless something is done, I don't think people are going to vote for the budget until you make some real changes. I don't think you've done your due diligence. Thank you.
I'd just like to comment before we go to the next person, and technology is not my field, but one of the things I would caution you about, I believe some of the districts you're talking about are new schools. And so when they build a new school, they have all the technology in it. We started with nothing and have built up what was recognized as a model technology and communication system. So I would just ask you to look when you go for numbers, particularly to see if they're new school districts that start with everything. Okay, name and address, please.
My name is Maria Santos, and I live at 19 Parkhurst Road. I currently have 2 children at McCarthy Middle School. They're 5th graders. They're my only chance at the 5th grade or at any grade because they're my only children and they're twins. So every year I only get 1 chance to do it right for my children, and it's one of the reasons I am pretty much involved in this system. I was the PTO president for a few years at Center School. Currently, I'm co-president of the PTO at McCarthy, and I co-president of the Council of Schools. And we've been talking quite a bit among parents, why would we cut 2 positions at McCarthy at this time? And the numbers, as we see them, are as follows. There are currently 89 students at Center, 1 just joined this week, 88 at South Row, You've got 177 students right there. That's the 4th grade. Typically, 20 come in from Harrington. I just heard 10 to 20 come in from Byam. And this year, they had 19 students come in from private school throughout the year. Those are the real numbers. Those are not going to get cut next year. Where the cuts are coming from in the numbers in your proposals here, I don't understand. But I will leave you to respond to that, if you will, if I can just continue for a minute. We are talking about 5th graders, the 1st grade in the middle school level. And I know for some of you, this is very realistic because you've had children go through this school system. This is a very vulnerable grade. It's a chance for these children to acclimate themselves to quite a bit more freedom. It's a chance for them to understand their environment, to understand dealing with more than one teacher at a time for various subjects. The proposal that's been done would eliminate 2 teachers teaching math and science. The team concept at McCarthy would suffer tremendously. You then would have to have ELA teachers basically create curriculum for science and math that would impact 2 teams. It is a substantial change to McCarthy's system right now. And it's not fair to the students. It's not hurting anyone other than students. When you have a total class number of potentially over 25, there is no way that a teacher can help all those students. And especially true in an environment where you've got emotional, behavioral difficulties, English language learners coming into a classroom. The impact in a class over 25, and believe me, I am an English learner. English is my second language. It is very difficult for a teacher to pay attention to a student in those circumstances. It will impact everyone overall, especially the students. As a community, we don't support cutting these teachers. It's not about the individuals. It's truly about the positions. It's about the teams and that concept. It's about the children being able to then go on, do well in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and move up into the high school and continue to do well. If you really want to support the children and you want to continue great education in this town, there is no way that eliminating these positions will do it. I worked very hard at Center School with a team of incredible parents to make sure that technology came into that school. And we did it. I heard Mr. Thomas one time say a bunch of bake sales and collecting junk in the middle of the rain. But we did bring some technology into that school from these funds. And today, those children are learning. You know what? Today, I would say to you, don't put more whiteboards in your classroom. They cost you $12,000 a shot. A whiteboard is in front of each child and an iPad that costs $500. It's very important to look at that technology budget and please leave the teachers where they are. The kids need them. Thank you.
Glenthorne, 18 Pinewood Road. I'm excited to hear people come here and talk about their priorities because that's what really matters to the community. What are we going to do for the kids? Extremely important. I am not going to go after individual numbers. I have some more global questions to ask about how we got to where we are and where we're going from here, and I hope you can help me understand a few things on the path forward. First of all, from the community perspective, I'd like to thank Mr. Antonelli for the fine job he's done in realigning the books, because there's no greater transparency than a clear chart of accounts where every dollar is where it belongs and every dollar can be seen for every purpose that's well defined. So on behalf of myself, who hasn't looked at this in great detail until the past 6 months, I think the community greatly appreciates the visibility and, I call it, transparency that you have provided. There are some important things that you've heard in previous speakers that I'd like to find out if going forward, we can have in our budgeting process and in our analysis of where we can economize, where we can cut the finances, where we can find the money to keep the teachers employed. And so I have two main questions. Number one is, have we done or do we plan to do what some other speakers have alluded to as benchmarking? Now, I don't know whether the benchmarking is correct, that this school system has spent this much in this area or this school system has spent this much in this area, but having run a budget that's many tens of millions of dollars in part of my career, you need to know what things should cost compared to your competition, and I won't call the other towns our competition, but there is a way to look at what does it cost to maintain certain things like technology, like facilities and so forth in other towns. So I'd ask generally, or anybody can specifically answer that, have we done benchmarking, or is that part of the future plan now that we have a good chart of accounts to look at other districts and where they are spending their money and what they get for it?
It's definitely part of the future for this town. You have to look at all the expenses. You have to compare yourself with other communities throughout the Commonwealth. You're not able to do that with the accounts that you've had this year as well as the previous years, because, as I've explained, money has been expended in different accounts and it should not have been. So when you report all of your information to the Department of Education, they come out with a summary and they'll tell you by function code how much each community is expending. If you don't have real numbers, you can't compare yourself with those other communities.
So this is a good piece of news. So now that we have our budget sort of aligned with the other way other communities would report their budget, we could do benchmarking in similar towns with similar sized schools and the like. So that.
Yes.
But the other piece that I would add to that, Glenn, too, and Mr. Thomas alluded to that in terms of the context of where other schools are. So, for example, folks who are implementing the Common Core in math, for example, several years ago, if you looked at our spending for mathematics, for example, to move over to the new standards, our spending was probably on an increase. Right now, that's plateaued. The same thing as you could pick any other particular area. If you pick technology, as Al had said, we've been trying to play catch-up for the last couple of years, where you may have schools that are already at that level or that are not at the level in terms of providing services for our students and for our staff.
Absolutely.
And the word you mentioned was priorities. So that comes down to the priorities of this committee. That comes down to the priorities of the town in terms of, as you're preparing students to go to university, college, work that is online, that is classes that have requirements in terms of the technology piece, it does come down to priority. So I agree with you 100%.
I absolutely, completely agree with you. I mean, heaven forbid, there are some towns with high schools that cost $210 million. You know, I'm not saying let's compare our infrastructure with a $210 million high school. It's set up differently. But it's important that, you know, we take the context correctly, not just number number one and number two, letter one and letter two, but put it in context. I think that's important. But now we can do that, and that's really what I was looking for.
No, that's great.
And so the next question becomes less important, because I was going to ask, going forward, we have the ability now, I'm hoping, to do a trend analysis of the change in budget on a year-to-year basis. You've alluded to some trends you were able to capture and put into this budgeting process. Is that going to be a way that we proceed in the future with our budget, so that we can see that we aren't on a hockey-shaped curve for some particular reason and determine that we're beginning to expend excessively in an area or not enough, all the way around, that we can look into the past and see we should be increasing costs at a certain rate?
You will have accurate information if you follow this chart of accounts, and you'll be able to track those expenses, and you'll be able to tell where you're heading in this town if you're looking at the previous expenses.
Okay, I'm just looking for what tools do we have now, and it sounds like a lot, in order to determine where to find the money in the future to be able to save those teachers' jobs, because I think in a priority sense that is important. Thank you very much.
Let him cut in line and steals your thunder. So, I'll leave the part that I let him cut in line and he kind of stole my thunder. I'm Mike Wallach, 9 Whipple Tree Road, and I was also going to talk, there's 2 points, and it's over. one is about the operational best practices, because in doing the walking around and listening to people talk, do we have an institutional problem because we have 7 physical buildings, whereas other communities have fewer, so some of that built-in cost is there as a fixed cost. So if we start doing the benchmarking against all elements, Dr. Thomas, you talked about...
I don't have my doctorate, just it's all right.
I was elevating you to high status.
Thank you.
But Al, when we were talking about, you mentioned a new school with its infrastructure in place versus ours. I think the community needs to hear that on a relative basis, because that's all we really have. Because I have some numbers that could be meaningless. Like, we spend $12,000 per student. When we do it versus like-kind communities, that's on par or even a little bit higher. When we look at our sped pack costs, 23% of budget, that's on par with other communities. But so, yet our activity fees are higher than other communities. So when you start looking at it as, we need the Chapter 70 money that you talked about in your campaign, Sal, because we need help from a broad perspective. But why are our activity fee higher? Why do we have higher classroom sizes? Yet we're spending the same as other communities. And you can't blame it on special education, which I heard, because we're on par. So my question is really that whole benchmarking part, because it seems we're doing okay. It's how we're distributing the money. Then my little pet peeve is on activities. Both candidates in the school committee race talked about coming from meager means, right? And you talked about going into band, right? And Dad was a working class Joe. Sal, you talked about playing football. You came from a working class community. I stunk at sports, but I got to play football. I got to play tennis and lacrosse. But if my dad had to pay $300 to play a sport, I better have been really damn good at it. So if we're elevating our activity fees, and I keep on hearing how they're institutionalized almost, like, well, that's the way it is, I bet you if we did a study, we have fewer 3-letter varsity class people nowadays than we had 15 years ago, because families can't afford it. And so one of the things is, when you throw it into the mix here, let's look at our activity fee structure. If we're looking to have children participate in the school system like Sal did, like Anita did, are we taking that away from them? Because none of them are going to be, most of them aren't going to be great athletes, but are we taking that ability away from them? So as you go negotiate in the future or think about things, I'd really like you to consider that. Because, you know, there was a case where, Mike, you and I talked last year, there was one piece of software that was instituted where literally the soundbite was kids were paying to submit homework. That is just fundamentally wrong in a public school system. And that we instituted last June in one elective. So when we take a look at some of these activity fees, and the structure and how kids participate, in addition to students and class sizes, are we limiting participation? Are we becoming a community of have and have-nots? If you have the money, you can participate. If you don't, you can't. And I hope you guys take a look at it in the coming year. Thanks.
Curtis Martin, 15 State Street, Town Meeting Rep, Precinct 9. Just 2 points very quickly. Number one, each line of that budget, if you did a zero-based budget, you should have a decision package on each line of that budget, i.e. why is it what it is. The technology budget, for example, will list the software packages and the rental per year or whatever it is. We do that routinely in the private sector. You should have that, and you should be able to make that available to the town meeting, line by line by line by line by line, and if you can't do that, please let us know. Second thing, my preference would be, in regard to Mr. Lupoli's motion, is to delete management rather than contact. I think you will find that's much easier to do. Please justify each line of management, each number, each person, incrementally, one at a time, to the town meeting. Thank you.
Sue Dandera, Old Stage Road, Precinct 9, Town Meeting Rep. Quick question that parents have asked of me in terms of the cuts. Coming into this meeting, I was under the impression that it was a 5th grade math and science, 2 5th grade math and science teachers. In the discussions here, it sounded more like a 5th grade team. Can you clarify that?
When you're looking at reducing at a particular grade level, you look at seniority on that team level. And so in these two particular cases, you have your two least senior hires to the district.
And that's a math and two math and science teachers.
In terms of what they're currently teaching now, yes.
Okay.
By license, grades 1 to 6, like our elementary folks, they're licensed to teach all levels.
Right.
Or all subjects.
So does that mean if we're left with 4 teams, we'll be left with 4 teams in the 5th grade?
Yes.
And does that mean that teachers that are not primary licensed in math and science will be teaching those subjects?
Their primary license in the 5th grade, except for one particular staff member, is elementary 1 to 6. So in other words, they could teach math, social studies, science, English.
Okay. Well, I guess if you look at it the way it is this year versus the way it is next year, for the subjects the 5th grade teachers were teaching this year,
yes,
that's going to shuffle around
yeah,
if we propose these. Okay.
That is.
Second quick point is to the previous speakers. You know, I think we're at a real disadvantage in our budget this year in that we have rearranged the accounts, we've added accounts, and so our disadvantage is we can't benchmark to other districts yet. Through the, as you said, the Department of Education can help us do that. We can't look at the gaps versus last year or the last 3 years. So I think it's a difficult time, and being in that position and looking to cut the teachers that we're looking to cut, I think is a mistake. And as previous speaker said, I think you're going to have a very hard time having town meeting reps stand up and vote for those cuts when we can't present whether we are over budget versus last year, under budget, where we are in comparison to where we should be. At fall town meeting, we were underfunded over almost 1.5 million in special ed. Now, I don't know where we stand now today. Do we know if our special ed budget has increased a certain percentage compared to where we were last year? Do we know if certain line items and departments are overspending? And I think that needs to be done before we can make these type of cuts. So again, I do urge that you go back and look at this budget. I think at town meeting, it's going to be very difficult to pass those cuts. Thank you.
Claire Janot, Precinct 7. So my question is more specific, I guess, to the personnel in general. First, I want to say I appreciate all the detailed work that's gone into this budget. I know what it takes, and it's much easier to look at what we're seeing this year than what we've seen in the past. That said, I think that this is a slide I'm looking at. There's so much out there that I'm really focused on the budget book itself, which I realized was before the cuts were taken. But there was a nice slide that showed budget enhancements and deletions and showed that the administration had wanted to add 4.1 FTEs across the district. Mm-hmm. And that included the restoration of the science coordinator and the English language arts coordinator. And had also 1.4 FTEs, which I suspect is probably broken up into little teeny FTEs at various schools for ELL and SEI. And what I don't know is where to find, so all this 4.1 FTEs added up to a total of 478,000. I realize that, the offsetting 2 grade 5 teachers is part of the cuts that have been subsequently proposed, but how much of this other 478,000 is still in there? The coordinators have both been cut, as I understand it, but are the other positions that were being added still in the budget?
Yes.
Including the ELL supports that are needed? That's all I just really want to know, because I know how important those are. And so on the coordinators, is there any, what is the impact to the school district? Because I know everybody thinks administration is just something that is an easy target, but I think of administration in positions like ELL supports as things that are one of the sort of concrete pilings that hold the teaching up and make it easier for their classroom existence day to day. And so what is the impact of not having a science coordinator or an ELA coordinator to our district and to our teachers?
Right. In terms of the ELL position, those are teaching positions.
I understand.
Okay. And in terms of the science coordinator and our ELA coordinator, we had looked to put both of those back into our preliminary budget. In terms of making reductions, what we looked at and what's been recommended here is to keep the impact away from children as much as possible, but also, too, to look at without changing, to have too many moving parts. So say, for example, we have currently someone serving in the role for math and science, and we have somebody currently serving in the role for ELA and social studies. So if we were to reduce administratively, which we did look to, it made sense to us to have and to continue in that manner because we've already had a year under that particular system. For example, in our science this year, moving toward the next generation science standards, we have a staff member in place who has done that transition with the math department. So to be able to have that formula to take our current curriculum, match it against the standards, pull those apart, do the crosswalk, and implement it into the new curriculum that we would have here in Chelmsford. We have somebody who's quite skilled in that, and we feel quite confident in that person's ability. What we've also done as well is provide, through a grant, currently we have had math coaches for the past few years, through a grant to provide support for our teachers in terms of those curriculum changes. We're rewriting the grant for next year to have support for those coaches to be in science as well. So you have a team of people who have experience moving from doing that crossover in terms of standards who are quite competent in that particular area. Same thing with our ELA and social studies. The staff member we have in place there has done a nice job this year. Is it ideal in terms of we would like to go back and have a curriculum or a department coordinator for each department? Not every district has that. They've put their administrative salaries into assistant principals, for example, at the elementary school, which our folks do not have. In terms of, you may go to another district and have a STEM coordinator, somebody who coordinates math, science, technology, and engineering.
So to just be brief, you're saying that you're confident with the people who are currently in these positions, you can meet the needs of the staff and the students?
We do.
With the current model?
Yes. Is it ideal? No, we would like to move back into the area in which we've had previously with a coordinator.
And somebody's tying all of the performance, it's so data-driven, somebody's tying all of the success of the children to the supports that are in place.
The data meetings are still happening at all grade levels in terms of science and ELA.
Right.
Teachers are working to meet the needs of students and looking at that data.
So overall, what is the percentage increase for this budget after the reductions that the manager needed? 3-something?
It's 3.01, I believe.
3%.
3%.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
3.01.
Hi, my name is Christine Lindberg. I live at 4 Evans Way. I have 2 kids, one in the CHIPS program and one in 3rd grade at Byam. And I know we've talked about numbers. There's actually 26 children in my son's class at Byam, and it is pretty large. But I just want to talk for a second. I'm a process person, and I think we have another process problem going on, because if the first cut of cuts that gets proposed includes teachers, we have not done our due diligence at all. Because teachers are the foundation of this entire school system. And right now, despite all the turmoil that's going on in our town, they're the reason our school system is intact. So I'm very appreciative, Sal, that you put forward to keep those teachers. Because I'm very concerned that the first proposal, not the second or the third or the fourth, involves teachers. That should be the last cut before the lights go out. And I'm very, very concerned. And I got to be honest, I'm sitting back here listening to all this, and I'm not sure why there isn't a ringing endorsement from our school committee to have them go back and look in depth at that budget and make sure there's no other area that can be cut from. I am very concerned about that. This is not the first time, and Sal has not been privy to everything that's gone on. We have a process problem going on, guys. Okay, we had it with the CHIPS busing. where we put forward a proposal. I don't know if you're familiar with what happened, Sal, last year. It's funny, this is almost a year to the day, where the proposal was put forward. It wasn't a proposal, it was actually an endorsement to cut the CHIPS busing. There was no impact analysis done. There was nothing done. It was rolled out. And because a series of parents came forward, myself included, and led a charge, there was an impact analysis done because we held the administration accountable, and the decision was reversed. So this is what I see. I see that was N equals 1. N equals 2 is when we cut the most popular librarian in the country, and then the coordinators. Did we do a thorough impact analysis then? I would argue we didn't. I would argue we didn't, and I think there's a room full of people that would agree. This is N equals 3 for me, because I'll tell you, there's no way that this team up here is doing their due diligence if you're telling me the first cut, the first pass of cuts includes teachers. There is no way that you guys are doing your jobs. There's no way. There is no way. And I will tell you, I will be here every meeting, and I will make every sacrifice that I have to, because I'll tell you right now, this is disassembling our school system piece by piece. And I commend Sal Lapoli for standing up here and saying, let's relook at it. I don't know why there isn't a ringing endorsement across this entire team to relook at it.
I would point out we haven't voted.
No, I appreciate that, and I noticed that somebody's not here, so I also have concerns about that.
That person happens to be on a conference for her business.
No, I
and
understand.
that was determined way before we just chose this particular date. The other thing is, if you had been at the subcommittee this morning, you would have heard a lot more discussion in order to arrive at the decision of making a motion this evening, the way that it has been presented.
So will you vote this evening? That's my question.
Yes, we have a motion on the table.
Okay, so what happens with the committee member that's not here?
She can't vote.
She can't vote, okay.
The only way that she could have voted is if to do a, what was it called? Conference call. We could have done a conference call. We do have remote participation. There's
I was just going to
policy legally
say,
for that.
I don't want to sound flip here, and I'm going to. With all the technology and all the money we have, we couldn't have put a WebEx together. I mean, I got to be honest with you. I feel like I'm living in a third world right now. This is insane. This is so important. These teachers are the lifeline of these schools. Have you guys done your due diligence to evaluate that budget, soup to nuts, that Mr. Antonelli put together for us to make sure that there's no other place that those cuts can be made?
When the budget first came out, how many hours did it take for us to go through it page by page? What it was that Regina did, we went through this FY16 budget page by page. Every single line item that had any increases, dramatic increases or dramatic reductions, there was a question asked as to why. It took a long time to go through it. But the reason that it took a long time was because we had never had anything like this in the past.
Right.
And we do, and because we had it, we want to ask questions about it, and we want to get those answers.
Okay, so that's my question. If Sal's putting forward a motion to go back to that very document and really examine it thoroughly to make sure the cuts can't come from somewhere else, why isn't that being endorsed? Is that not the proper plan?
I don't think there was a vote yet that it's not being endorsed.
Okay, good. So I'll calm down for 5 minutes.
Okay.
I hope you're going to support doing the due diligence because it hasn't been done in the past. That was the purpose of my examples. It has not been done. I'm not going to sit up here and argue about it. You have the opportunity to do your due diligence. Please endorse what Sal is proposing and move forward in the direction so that we make sure we're making the best decisions for this community, our kids, and the schools. Thank you.
Carol Kelly-Selesky, Precinct 5. I'm a town meeting rep, member of the community, an active member of the school community for a very long time. I'm also a member of the Mccarthy community, and I currently teach Spanish there to some really big classes. I think it's really important that you hear that this community is asking you to look at the decision and to reconsider the decision. Fortunately, somebody mentioned, when the doors opened last year at Mccarthy, there were 20 additional students in the 5th grade that were not anticipated. How can we possibly know that that's not going to happen again? In the second point I want to make, in trying to put together a team at the last minute in September of a starting year, there is no way that you could replace the 2 team members that are here in 2 weeks? August 28th, you find out, oh, guess what? We got 20 more people. Let's just pull together a couple more teachers because we're short. It doesn't work like that. These teachers prepare all summer long for the next school year. We work year long. I think it's really important also. I can't believe I'm following some of the speakers tonight. They are so well-spoken and so well-versed and so well-prepared and so well-informed. It's so exciting to see all these people here and involved. I agree with one previous speaker, and she said, I don't think that town meeting is going to support these cuts. And I think that's absolutely true. Town meeting agreed to make up the shortfall last time in good faith. There's additional shortfall now. Town meeting heard about the layoffs that came. They did touch students. They touched a lot of students. These layoffs will touch additional students, children. I hope you've heard the community. Thank you.
My name is Paul Davis at 17 Stedman Street. This actually blows my mind that we're having all these people here to discuss, to try to save teachers, because I can't even believe that the school committee and everybody's even put 2 teachers on the chopping block. Everybody in this room has a story that they can probably tell of a teacher that impacted their life. Okay, Sal, I'm sure everybody up there can do the same thing. I brought my son here because my wife works nights. He's in 3rd grade. His teachers are Mrs. Knight and Miss Buckley, okay? He loves going to school every single morning, okay? These are the formative years of their lives, all the way up to 5th, 6th grade. And I think, Evelyn, you said it, when they get into 5th grade, there's also a transition that they do because they're into middle school. They get the big kids there, okay? So they need people to try to lead them in the right direction. The technology department, I'm not a technology expert. I have an iPhone here. I probably use it 1% of what the capability of it is. But as intelligent people that are up there, you can't convince anybody in this room that you can't cut money out of the technology department to save those 2 teachers. Teachers, they're on the top of the food chain. Those are the last things that you touch. Christine said the teachers, and then you turn the lights out. And you had mentioned, you know, what if we get down to 18 kids in a class? I don't look at that as a bad thing. You showed a slide up there that shows Chelmsford at $12,000 per pupil, which is pretty low compared to that every other town that was on there. But our children, our students, they're awesome. They've accomplished a lot. They do that with the teachers, every single teacher that's there. You know, parents, how many times have you read in the newspaper that something goes on and how the police found out about it was a student told a teacher? Because there's a trust factor there. They see those teachers as much as they see their own parents. And you don't have to explain it to me or anybody else in this room. Explain it to my 9-year-old son. When he gets to 5th grade, he's going to have less teachers, or he's going to have more kids in his class. Because of why? We were afraid to touch the technology department because we need to put $67,000 in the high school. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions as leaders, okay? You know, one of my favorite quotes is from John F. Kennedy, and he said, some men look at things the way they are and ask why. Some men look at the things the way they should be and ask why not. And that's what we need to do here, is we need to ask why not? Why do we have to let these teachers go? And Christine's right. They should never have been on the chopping block at the first pass. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, really? We're talking 2 5th grade teachers out of the same school, and we don't think that's going to have an impact on our kids. And like I said, 18 kids, I don't care if we get down to 12 kids per class. If we can afford that, what's wrong with that? If you buy a car that's supposed to get 20 miles to the gallon and you get 25 or 30, you're going to take it back to the dealership? Well, you told me 20, I'm getting 25, I don't like that. Who cares? If we get better, we get better. Maybe Chelmsford can become a leader again in their school system, how they used to be years ago. Sometimes, as a good leader, everything points in the direction to make a certain decision, but you know in your heart and your gut that it's the wrong decision. And so sometimes, like my dad used to say, you just have to do the right thing. Regardless of what the facts tell you, sometimes you just do the right thing. In your business, Sal, you obviously have grown a successful business. You've had to make decisions that have been tough, and sometimes you go against what everybody tells you to do. Well, it's worked out pretty good. So hopefully we can transition that into our school system. But teachers, absolutely not. We need to look at other places to do it. And you know what? If you can't find them right away, then don't do it. I'm not an expert in the budget. Mr. Cohen back here is the expert in all that. But I'm reading a Lowell Sun article today, and there's $150,000 in the capital budget for interactive whiteboards. And if I hear interactive whiteboards one more time, I think I'm going to, put myself in a hospital. It's like every time I hear about those things, I have teachers from your schools that tell me half of them don't get used because the teachers don't like them. They don't want them. But we continue to $150,000 in whiteboards. And if we're trying to keep up with the Joneses, then, that's one thing. And I don't know if that money could ever be switched. I don't know how all the budgets work and all that. But we don't need another $150,000 worth of whiteboards when we have 2 teachers sitting on the chopping block, because there's not going to be anybody using those whiteboards. My phone, it's right here. If I stick it up on the desk right now and we just sit here, it does nothing. If a teacher picks it up and shows a student how to use it and what's its capability of, then it does something. So you can have all the technology you want, but if you have nobody in that room, it's not going to do anything. Nothing. Zero. Almost everybody in here, and I'm looking at their ages, so hopefully I'm not going to insult anybody, we all grew up with chalk and blackboards. We all turned out pretty good, including the people that are sitting up there right now. Technology is a tool. It's not a necessity. It's a tool to help teachers teach their kids. And I just hope that you relook at this and you vote on Sal's motion to be able to keep these two teachers. And like I said, something good always comes out of something bad. This has been a huge turmoil over the budget, but look what it's done. It's drawn this town together. And if you thought the microscope was big when we were starting this budget thing, if these teachers get laid off, the microscope's going to get about 10 times bigger. And if you spend $1 on something that somebody doesn't think is appropriate, then the town's going to be in an uproar. Chelmsford needs to prioritize and make their schools number one. Fire department, police department, and school teachers, we don't lay off. Okay? They protect us, they teach us, and those people are, in my opinion, they're untouchable. They are the top of the food chain. Everybody else, we need, you always get paid. You're smart people. You can look at that budget and find $100,000 or whatever their 2 salaries are together. You can do it. Give it to us in this room. We'll find it for you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Anita Tanini, 8 Columbus Ave. So I'm looking at the budget, $52 million. 75% of those are salary direct related, so that's $39 million. All others, $13 million. We're trying to save $100,000 for the salaries of these 2 teachers. That is less than 1%. So go back and look at every line item, and if it's $100, you save it. Don't tell me you cannot find less than 1% on the other $13 million to save these teacher salaries, because I don't believe it.
Glenn Diggs, Precinct 2. I have a comment and then a couple of questions. From the comment standpoint, the meeting started tonight with Al complimenting Mike Rigney for his past efforts. Now, getting compliments from one's peers who are represented by the front is generally considered pretty good. However, when you get compliments from the enemy, or let me say, loyal opposition, it usually means a little more. I would like to say that I think Mike's behavior since October has been outstanding, beyond outstanding. That he has really defined grace under pressure. He has certainly lived when it gets tough, the tough get going. And I just want to say personally that Life has been a living nightmare, I'm sure, for the last few months, and hope that you get to enjoy a little better over the next months coming up.
Thank you very much.
This meeting has exactly the same tone as the last public meeting. That meeting was all about 3 administrators being dismissed. This meeting is all about 2 teachers being dismissed. So obviously, we all know exactly what polarizes people, and that is people, in this case teachers, losing their job. It was mentioned in one of the previous meetings, and I've attended virtually every school committee meeting since October. I've attended most of the finance meetings, and I've also attended some of the morning meetings. And at one of those meetings, it was discussed by Ben Cole, who is in charge of the teachers union, about some deficiencies in how the teachers were going to be dismissed, that there's certain contract language that seemed to be violated, and there were a number of points. And so one of my questions is, has anyone addressed those? I thought it might have been an action item as a follow-up to see if those points were met. There's been no discussion of whether or not they have been, because some of the dates that applied to letting those people go were already passed. And since I know a little bit about that, I get a little bit concerned about it. Has anyone looked into that?
Part of the reason that the dates have gone by is because the school committee has not approved 100%, has approved what these reductions are. So tonight is like the last time that we will do that. That's why you have the motion on the table in which to change something. That's why you found out this evening that they were going to use money from the child care revolving account in order to replace the music teacher in order to fund the music teacher in the CHIPS program, because they're still looking at how to adjust the reductions to have the least amount of impact on children.
But I think one of the points that he made was that you have to notify a teacher by a certain date if their position is not going to be here. Once you go by that date, it doesn't say anything about why you passed that date. It just says you didn't pass the date. So are you illegally going to remove those people? And there has been no discussion of Ben's discussion, and there were many points that he talked about, that they would be able to bump other teachers and move to other positions, and none of that has been further discussed.
We have discussed that actually with the Federation of Teachers in terms of that piece. Just to your point, again, just to be clear, no one is being laid off in terms of losing their positions in this scenario. And yes, we've addressed that with the teachers union.
So the argument that we are cutting 2 teachers is not accurate. You are relocating 2 teachers. Is that a better way to say it?
Yes.
All right. So in the big picture, we're dealing with, if you go back and if anyone is here has ever taken an economics course, the first class starts with, you can either have guns or you can have butter. And that's the way it is. Whether you are running a multi-million-dollar business, whether you have a mom-and-pop variety store, whether or not you are at home and you're thinking about having this car or that car, it's all about guns and butter. There's only so much money to go around. So let's say that the discussion on the table, which hasn't been voted on, says that you want the 2 positions reinstated, which is in excess of $100,000. Is that correct, Dr. Ciano? Those
Yes.
2 salaries? Mm-hmm. So therefore, one of the choices are, well, you could fund that through school choice money. But I would guess that Mr. Antonelli has suggested that going forward next year, that school choice should be at a certain level for the next year. Am I correct on that?
I think it would be prudent on the school department's part if they left school choice so that they did have some type of contingency.
So if it begins the year at $100,000 less, there's a possibility that next year is going to be deja vu going back to the town asking for a supplemental budget because we come up short. That's one way to fund it. Correct? If that emergency fund doesn't last, as you hoped it would, be assigning a certain value to it, you're going to have to go back to the school committee, no, not to the school committee, but to the town at the interim town meetings and ask for more money. How are they going to feel about that? Who knows? All right? Or you can go back and take it from the technology accounts. Personally, I think it probably can be taken from there. But going forward, that means that you're going to have to take it away from them this year, next year, the year after that, and the year after that. And then you have the situation of all-day kindergarten, all right? Shall we bring in all of the parents who have children who are entering the school system and let them clamor about how there's no all-day kindergarten? Everybody is a special interest group. And all that anyone can say is fair is that someone has decided that the money should be spent on butter or more should be spent on guns. I think that the general feeling in the town has been over the past months is that decisions are not being made exactly where they should be. Now, maybe that will be resolved going forward with a new administration team, maybe it won't be. But I don't think the answers are that easy for anyone. And I don't think that, you know, cutting people is the right thing to do. But eventually, there are bigger decisions coming to the town. Eventually, this town is going to need schools. Maybe not for 15 years, but it's part of what the future planning is. So there's only so much money that's going to go around. And, you know, the town residents are relying on the school committee to spend the money wisely. And hopefully, that's what happens. Thank you.
Maria Santos again from Parkhurst Road. I just want to really it's very clear that we're not firing anybody and we're not laying off any teachers. However, you're looking at 2 math and science teachers, people who have experience in teaching that particular area of the curriculum. There's a reason why in the 5th grade you've got team teaching, because you separate the English language arts from the science and the math and somehow integrate it again into the entire team. And it is a reason why you need to keep these type of teachers there. If they're removed from this team, from this 2 of them, you've got to reham all the other teachers who are from the English arts to learn how to teach the science and the math. I'm pretty good at the English part, but I would not want to teach anybody math or science because they would probably never be able to understand a single thing. So I think you've got to really think about the fact that you are really changing what's happening there. Nobody's being let go, that's true, but what you're doing to that whole group is a huge impact. Thank you.
The woman that spoke made reference to getting our school system back to where it used to be. Behind the turmoil of the finance and so forth, our students have achieved at probably one of the highest levels they ever had in almost any area. Academically, mock trial, DECA, speech and debate, athletics. I challenge you to go back and find a group of students who in 1 year, in the midst of this crisis, could have done any better. We have outstanding kids, and to say anything that puts them 2nd, 3rd, or 4th is a disservice. And I felt necessary to say that.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like also to point out that, first of all, this is what makes Chelmsford so great. People with so much passion, that's why they care. That's why our kids continue to excel, because they come from great people that have great passion. But I just want to point out to everybody in the room, you know, we're going to go back and look at the budget, and we're going to ask our superintendent and the business manager to look at it. We're going to look at everything. We just don't want to focus on one particular, whether it's technology or one particular item. We want to look at everything. So just please keep that in mind and and let's not just focus on one when we can look at everything. There's a solution to everything. Thank you.
Yeah, just if I could comment as well. With the motion on the table, what I would ask of the committee is, as you folks know, this was our recommendations. And, you folks, as you move forward in terms of putting together, this motion, and through your vote, through the chairman, to me and our team, we'll be happy to look at absolutely everything. Again, we had gone through no stone unturned. When you look at these particular line items, we collectively as an administration understand these line items like never before, and that includes past superintendents, past committees, past FinComs, and so forth. We have a full grasp of where we're at. That was our recommendation. What I would ask for the committee is, again, you can cut absolutely anything. You can pick anything. We could cut, name it. The question comes down to your priorities in terms of where you would have us focus. In terms of, we will do that work, we'll gladly do that work, and we shared that this morning. But this was our recommendation. So I would ask in your motion if you could provide us guidance in terms of where you would like us to focus, rather than have us come back. If you ask us to find money to put back 2 fifth grade teachers, we would do that. Obviously, a group of folks will be here at the following meeting talking about some area that we had cut as well. So I would just ask for your guidance. And if that's not available this evening, then perhaps we could put together a vehicle in which you could share that with us.
So what you're saying is receiving the budget today and kind of going over some of these newest items on my part, would we have ample time to get back to you on that, sir?
Well,
as opposed to making a decision tonight?
We do have, it's at the pleasure of the board in terms of our timeline, in terms of working for town meeting. You folks have voted the 52 for. Town meeting votes that up and down in terms of what that looks like. It's how we divide that by the line items as we develop. Mr. Antonelli is looking to put, or we've held off in terms of reducing those particular line items, as he had mentioned to Ms. Jackson in terms of athletics. We are reducing that by $10,000. That's not reflected here yet because you folks have not essentially shared with us your priorities for reductions. So once you've done that, we'll be able to do that. I know our turnaround time is quick.
We're going to react very quickly, and thank you very much for offering for us to kind of rethink this and tomorrow and support you a little bit more. So thank you.
Okay.
I would like to thank everybody that came and spoke in support of the teachers, in support of taking a closer look at other areas of our budget. I would encourage you to continue to watch and continue to ask questions. It shows more in the school committee that's reflective of this year that people actually are paying attention. For many years, we hardly had anybody ever show up at public input to tell us if they liked what we were doing or they didn't like what we were doing. It doesn't mean that we can't make those difficult decisions on an annual basis or even on a bi-weekly basis. Many of us are well-versed in education and understand what those priorities should be in order to be able to educate your children. However, I would welcome more input and more scrutiny on that basis, because if we're all in it together, there may be other people that have other skills or other jobs that are more focused on some of the areas that we deal with, and you may be looking at things a whole lot different maybe than we would, and so I would welcome any opportunity to have those discussions. So are we going to, you want to make a vote, take a vote?
Yes, but I also would like to thank you all for coming. We didn't know how many people would come, and as Evelyn just said, sometimes it's not very many, and so it is very helpful. We need to hear from all different kinds of people, and it's important that you continue to give input, because the financial situation of both the town as well as the school is going to be a challenge for a number of years to come, as most of you already know. So thank you for coming. And I would like to take action with the motion.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
Can I ask a question first?
Yes.
Dr. Tiano, where will these fifth grade teachers go if the positions are eliminated through the budget?
There are a number of positions open across the district within their licensure.
Within their licensure?
Yeah.
Within the fifth grade?
There is one position in the 5th grade, is a one-year position over at the Parker. And I don't have my list in front of me, but there are other elementary-type positions as well as a special education position or two.
Are we ever going to be in a situation where, if we retain these two positions, where they would not be the first two out? So that we would always be in a situation where if there are reductions in the team at the 5th grade at McCarthy, then we would always be losing 2 math and science teachers?
No, that has to do with licensure. I'm in terms of years of service, in terms of the reduction piece. When you look at your 5th grade team, for example, your licensure is not a math science or a ELA social studies. You have folks who currently occupy 5th grade positions across both middle schools who have taught elementary school, who have taught all disciplines. Their licensure assures us that they're able to teach those particular disciplines as well. So it's not just a math science piece, I think was your question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Move for a vote.
Was there someone that wanted to speak from the back of the room?
You'd already closed.
No, the hand just wanted to pass it.
Okay.
For a vote.
Just real briefly, if I could say something. I've been impressed with what I heard tonight. I'm willing to take into account what I'm hearing. Clearly, there is an emphasis on retaining teachers, even at the cost of other line items. And I appreciate getting the input.
Okay. Are we ready to vote? Do we have the wording?
Do you have the wording on your motion, just to repeat it,
yes.
please?
You gotta help me, I'm the rookie.
It's been a while. I think it would be helpful to read it, or to restate it.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we reinstate the 2 5th grade teachers to the existing positions that were eliminated at McCarthy, and ask the superintendent to relook at the rest of the budget cuts to find a budget that allows this.
Okay, all set? Okay, poll the committee. Mr. Lapoli? Mr. Rigney?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Horan? Aye. It's unanimous. Business?
Not me, no.
Believing there's no further businesses, I would just point out that the format for tonight, because the dominant item was the budget, this was not traditional in terms of our agenda, and some of the things that would normally be dealt with, particularly through the first part of the agenda, we'll pick up again on the 28th. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous, we're adjourned.